All right, everyone. Welcome to our first ever podcast. And today we're going to be talking about who the fuck we are, what we do, and why we're doing this thing called the podcast. The podcast. So, Roxanne, who are you? And why are you doing this?
I am a writer and a retired-ish counselor. And I have a social media platform about spirituality and personal development. And my history is that I got, I always want to talk about this, but I don't always want to lead with it. But I do think one of my strengths is that I do come from a really trauma informed place, that I come from childhood trauma, and then I've had a good amount of trauma in my adult life, even though I like to say that I had one of the shittiest childhoods and then I'm having like one of the best adulthoods ever. But that I got, I had this trauma. I got sober at 15 and immediately was just surrounded by people who were invested in personal development and recovery and teaching me spirituality. So I started meditating so I got sober, and then I found this place called the Yes School. It was a clean and sober high school. We had classroom time, like 3 hours of like academic stuff, and then about an hour and a half at least every day of therapeutic stuff, and then individual counseling on top of that, and then family counseling if I didn't have a family to come to it. And so at that place, they started teaching me about meditation and mindfulness and kindness at the Yes School.
At the Yes School.
No, when I was a kid.
When you're a kid.
So
okay.
I got there when I got sober 2 weeks before my 16th birthday. I started at the Yes School like 2 weeks after my 16th birthday.
And they taught meditation there.
They taught meditation. Okay. And personal development stuff. And then I went on to become a counselor there. And then for 14 years, I was a counselor, and then I became the director of the Yes School and some other programs there. And so I worked for 14 years as a professional in the substance abuse, gang deferment. I worked with white supremacist youth. I worked with a lot of people on trauma recovery. As considered a paraprofessional, because I'm not a licensed therapist.
Interesting.
And I didn't get any licensure. Paraprofessional.
Paraprofessional.
And then at the same time, I've always been a writer. And so I have, while I was doing that, I was doing writing classes and working on writing. And then we could talk about this at another podcast, but after 14 years, I had this near-death experience that made it really clear that I needed to stop my career as a counselor, which I never thought I would. I was like so invested, both in the Yes School in that I had gone there, and then I was I was managing it, and I loved it so much, but that I had this very clear reckoning of like, if I can't do both, I can't write my book, I can't do it anymore. And so I quit in 2013 and have just focused on being a full-time writer. And in that time, I started a social media platform that I thought was just to, we'll get to these little babies, those little cards. I thought that it was, as a writer, nowadays you need a social media platform. And I started this Instagram page with one of the teacher from the Yes School, and it was a way to stay connected with the young people we had worked with, and give the brand of playful, deep talks and spiritual quotes and engagement. And then it just ballooned out of there. So she, at first it was called Unicorn Maps. After our mascot at the Yes School, it was a unicorn named Gloria. That was the bathroom pass. And then people started getting tattoos of Gloria.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of tattoos out there of this unicorn. But then when I shifted over and just called it Spiritual as Fuck, and it became fully mine, I it grew really fast. And then in that, so when I was like, I'm backing away from being in the counseling or, personal development field to be a writer, my career about personal development started taking off with this platform, and I ended up meeting a publisher who Knock Knock Publishing, which is a gift publisher, but that does more they're taking humor and putting it towards deeper meaning. And so they approached me and we developed these cards, which were my little dream of like, if I always wanted to write a self-help book for people with a really, 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 really short attention span. And so I put my two little self-help books in card decks. And so one is Spiritual AF and the other one's Grateful AF. I'm pointing to them if you're just listening to this on audio, and they're my little self-help books in a box. You can do them in tiny bite sizes. And I think that's who I am, like in a nutshell. And we'll talk about why the podcast after we know who the fuck are you, Joe?
I don't
and who are we?
know.
We're going to get to who are we, because we are greater than you and me.
Power in numbers.
Who are you, Joe?
Who am I?
And why should we be listening to you?
I don't know. I really don't fucking know. But that's a whole nother subject, is not trusting in myself and my wisdom. But who am I? I shoot, in small words, I'm a father, a husband, a musician, a friend, and a seeker of the truth, of my own truth. I teach meditation to at a couple rehabilitation centers in Santa Cruz.
What kind of rehabilitation?
Addiction rehabilitation centers. So one I work with youth in recovery, up at the Camp Recovery Services, and I work with adults out at Elevate Addiction Services. And I think that's it. Elevate Addiction Service, I believe. And also I run groups up at the Santa Cruz Juvenile Hall through a nonprofit organization called the Mind Body Awareness Project. And I lead meditation once a month at a place in Santa Cruz. It's called the Pacific Cultural Center, and it's just called Midtown Meditation. And that's once a month. And then also once a month we do, a friend of mine, Jessica Escombito, and I do a group called Dharma Homies, that is doing more relational Dharma, how to use these practices in relation with people. So yeah, I do that, and I'm a dad, still playing music a little bit, and that's who I am and what I do. And
well, I just want to jump in too and say that you are a writer as well.
That's true. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because all this stuff, and like I keep talking about it, where it's like this stuff is so new to me, and it's like offering this. It's like this is such a personal practice for me. So it's like to articulate what I do, I just do it. What I do. And so yeah, I actually I was asked to write about my relationship with drugs and alcohol and music and being in a band, and so I'm like, okay, I want to know how to write. So I was checking out Spiritual AF and following Roxanne, and we've known each other for a long time that we'll get into in a minute. But I noticed that you do the writer's resource. That's my
other Instagram page, Writer's Resource.
And I'm like, and I knew you're doing a lot of writing and workshops, so I contacted Roxanne and joined one of her workshops, and that was really cool because I got some really good feedback and where I can bring the direction, and it was like, this is so therapeutic. So the writing process has just that's super new to me. So to call myself a writer or anything, but even, writer is so new. But yeah, I do some writing as well. And I love poetry. I love rhyming words, yeah. So yeah.
Good.
I think that's about it. Yeah.
And so we're who we are. So Joe and I, we've known each other since I can't remember exactly how old I was. I was young, and I was starting. We both started in with the beginnings of Dharma punks, like like when we were just all these young punker. Most of us, I think, almost all of us were in some form of like sobriety.
Yeah, pretty much all of us were.
And I was 17 or 18 when that started.
Baby.
And you know, you're a few years older than me.
I was I think around 23.
Yeah. So maybe I was a little older. And so we started, so I knew you from that scene, and then we started just meeting at each other's houses and meditating, listening to meditation cassettes. I
hated it too. I hated it. Y'all were totally into it, and I was like, "This is some bullshit." I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would throw pillows. Yes. I remember I would throw pillows at y'all. Yeah.
Or fart.
Yeah. Just make some kind of like look at me kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we've known each other that long, but then, you know, you went off with music, and then I went off with all the shit I was doing, and then you contacted me. Like, I think you wrote me a really nice direct message, like really encouraging first. And I was like, "Oh, Joe."
Yeah. I heard you on a podcast, and just I realized how much we had in common with working with teens, working with the youth, and that you're still doing it, and then how all this other stuff's coming around too. And it's just like, oh shit, this is somebody that I really want to connect with again.
Yeah. And then you came to the writers workshop, and then we met to just talk about stuff, and then it was like immediately we started in on these conversations that we couldn't stop. Like, we're both really busy, and then we would be like pushing the time out to just be like, oh my gosh, we're in the middle of this talk. And then I have been sharing myself on Instagram and Facebook for years, and people have been wanting, you know, to have bigger conversations with me and saying I should do a podcast, but I just didn't have it in me to like learn about microphones and you know, like how to do the sound and all that. And I was like, I don't want to just sit and talk by myself. And I was having it in my head about maybe doing something, but then I just never felt good about it. I never felt like it's that gut feeling. And then when you and I started talking, and then it was like, I think I brought it up where I was like, I think you said I have a recording studio, but I was like, oh my gosh, we could do a podcast. And then we started talking about it, and I just got more and more and more excited.
I remember we're saying just like, we need to stop talking. Just stop talking. We just record it. So we'd even like, okay, stop.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because the reason why I want to do this with you is because I just burped.
Okay, it wasn't a sneeze.
It wasn't a sneeze. Cool. It was a burp. I don't even know if I want that cut out, you know, because I have a tendency to burp all the time when I am like trying to talk seriously. Okay, so with you, I felt like our conversations were holding this thing that I want to share, and it's this feeling of it's both, you know, spiritual, meaning, you know, like having deep talks, but also that we like fuck with each other naturally. We know each other, but also I'm like deeply curious at like what has been going on for you all these years that we have, like, I mean, it's not like we never saw each other ever, but it's been way peripheral. And so, and it's just the playfulness and that you can hold that, like, I think poop jokes are funny, and at the same time, and so that's like why I was like, I think this might be the place, the time where we start this podcast, as well as like, I think, you know, do you want to say anything about that before I jump into what I hope happens?
Yeah, I totally do, because the reason why, I don't even know if the reason, but why I feel so comfortable and it was just so authentic was because they're the same kind of holding of, in my practice of, it's super important. I so fumble around my practice and what I'm doing, and it just feel really held, like, and I can be curious about just questions, even like the dialogue that we have around topics that we'll get into, like patriarchy, racism, you know, sexuality, all that kind of stuff. And it was just like, there was just a comfort level. And I really, I look for that in relationships. And same thing where people were asking me through the rehabs that I work at, like, how can I, because they're from all over the country, and they're like, how can I take you with me kind of thing. And I'm like, I don't know, you know. And they're like, do you have a podcast? Do you have all this stuff? I'm like, oh, I don't even know what that means. And then when you're talking about podcasts, I'm like, oh, okay. The universe provided. So it was like that, and the comfort level of our discussions of like really being like calling each other in, like when I could fumble, like, oh, what did you just say, kind of thing. I'm like, oh, I just said blah blah blah, and you're like, oh, well, no, we don't say that. This is what we, you know, whatever.
We don't say that.
Yeah. Just all those kind of things, and the topics where it's like learning this and waking up together to the fucking the discomfort of what this life can be like and be sometimes. So that's kind of the connection and why with you and spiritual as fuck. And it's just, yeah, it makes so much sense. It's like spirituality is super special to me. And it was almost, when I first saw it, it was like I was kind of judgmental. What do you mean spiritual as fuck? You know what I mean? It's supposed to be more spiritual. So I was judgmental. I'm like, no, spiritual as fuck, that we can be all encompassing, you know, we don't have to change everything. So I really like that about you. Yeah.
Well, and I'm just going to talk not to Joe here. I'm going to talk to you, is that I love that Joe's humble, and that, and I totally respect that you are like a badass. And that I think part of it is that I like, you're humbly doing this stuff, and then I'm like, God, he's such a badass, and I want to hear what you have to say, but you're doing it also in this way that is just like sweet, and I like that we're different. I like that you have a way more kind of cerebral grasp of Buddhism, and I have a practical, and you have a practical. I mean, I'm like this, like Joe has been meditating for a long fucking time and sticks with it and does it, and I have a way more I esoteric, or like I do whole bunches of shit, and I've been meditating since those Dharma punk days, but not in this way that you have, and the understanding that you have, as well as just like the different lives that we lead. You know, like we're pretty different, but yeah. So I'm excited about that. And I think, partly I want to offer people, I mean, I don't know. I mean, partly it's just like, I think as a woman, it's really fine for me to say, like, I have something to say, and I think I have a right to fucking say it. Yeah. And I, you know, and I'm not sure you have a right to say that, Joe, since you have, you know.
I'm not saying shit.
But like, but I think that there is something about like just coming out and being like, let's have these conversations about how spirituality doesn't have to be a certain way, how it actually affects our lives, and how to deal with having big personalities and big emotions, and how does that intersect with faith and practice and all of that stuff. And that partly it's like I get these direct messages from people when I write personal stuff, and that like every once in a while somebody will say like, oh, it makes me want to cry, like, you helped me through a really, really, really tough day. And I'm just like, gosh, like if my putting myself out there is going to do something like that, then it's worth it. And it's not completely altruistic. Like, honestly, I think I don't have to be completely altruistic to be doing good things in the world. But that, I just like, if we can like make it okay for somebody to be like having a funky spiritual path, then fuck yeah, I'm down. Like, let's do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing that I love about you too, is like, and I think it's such a good fit, because for me, it's like, I was getting into that. I have to be a certain way to be spiritual and like at peace kind of thing. And it's like, but I felt this pull, like, no, I still like fucking music blaring at me, yelling kind of music. I love playing that kind of music aggressively. You know, I have a truck with big rims on it or whatever, you know what I mean? But I can have both, you know. It's like it doesn't have, there's a balance with it, you know. It doesn't have to be so one way or the other. And that's what I'm learning from you. And that's my hope with this podcast as well, is that, yeah, we can totally be good people, and we don't have to abandon any part of ourselves. You know, as long as we're being good people to ourselves and to others, you know.
Yeah. So, yeah. And so we're going to delve into some big topics. I think I actually don't have the list here exactly, but we're going to be talking just about, well, what is spirituality? What is mindfulness? how to deal with big emotions, how to deal with being pissed off, stuff like the intersection between like civic engagement, like what are we doing within the world, and how does that manifest within ourselves, patriarchy,
how to be a sensitive bro. Seriously, because it's something I'm waking up to. For me, it's important.
And how to be a bad bitch with a big heart.
Absolutely.
Like how do we do all of that, and so we've got a list of things that we're going to talk about, and then I think hopefully we're going to be having some guests at some point, just to start. Also, not just that we have something to say about it, but I think you and I don't know, cut that part. Will you be sharing any of your writings with us, with everybody? I might be bringing in. I guess I didn't say that I have a master's degree in creative writing, and I teach writing with a poet.
That. Yes.
I'm a real writer. Yes. I'm doing my fucking work. And I use poetry, like. I don't want to be mean. Well, I use poetry as a spiritual tool. In the mornings I do, and then we could talk about practice, but one of the things I do is that I have books from really great poets, and I pick up poetry, and sometimes within a topic, there is a poem that lives within that poem, and so I could share poetry and books and things like that.
Just burped.
You did?
Yeah, I did. It was like I was trying to hide it.
Yeah.
See?
You don't have to hide it. You don't have to hide it.
Learning, Roxanne. Thank you for teaching me.
So I'm not going to be sharing. Maybe I'll share some of my writing.
Yeah, okay.
But
you can show up how you are.
Yeah.
But I'll share some music. If you share some of your writing, I'll share some music that I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll happen.
Maybe. That'll be that'll be on a special account.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Whatever
I do. I share my writing on my Patreon account.
That's
we can talk about that.
Yeah,
and so, well, we're wrapping up now. So thank you so much for being with us on our very first podcast ever. So if you want to support us, if you know anybody who would like this podcast, please feel free to share it with them. Also, if you want to screenshot this episode and share it on social media, if you tag me at spiritual_AF, I will give you a big thank you on my stories. And then also, if you have ideas or topics that you would like us to cover, please feel free to email us at spiritualaf or whatever @gmail.com. And Joe, where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram at _joe.clements_.
And you can find me on Instagram once again at spiritual_AF, as well as Writer's Resource. Thank you so much. Once again, I'm Roxanne McDonald.
And I'm Joe Clements.
And we're spiritual as fuck.
Walrus clap.
Or whatever.
Or whatever.
Or whatever.
Whatever.